We all know that Pikachu is the mascot of Pokemon, but who is the second mascot of this series? Charizard and Eevee are the first two Pokemon that fans will think of for many reasons due to the marketing, but there are many other Pokemon who are strong contenders to be the secondary mascot, and there's one Pokemon in particular that I legitimately think might overthrow all these Pokemon in this contest. But let's go through all our contenders one by one. Charizard, the final evolution of Charmander, one of the original 3 starter Pokemon. Where to even begin with Charizard? Charizard gained recognition from the beginning of Pokemon, simply for being the cool looking fire dragon that's not a dragon. It was so cool that it was the only one of the Kanto starters that had debuted as a game mascot across the world internationally, while Venusaur was the other mascot in Japan and Blastoise took Venusaur's spot internationally. It was also both the strongest of the 3 starters stat-wise and the most used starter between the 3. Now in terms of stats, I don't think people were looking into all that, but due to the way the special stat worked in Gen 1 with special attack and special defense being the same stat, and critical hits being based around the speed stat, it was obvious who the strongest starter was. Yeah, there is an argument that Blastoise and Venusaur are the better starters in taking down the gym leaders and all, but that doesn't equate to their overall strength and usability. And while it may have been chosen and used for its design, over time it became known as the strongest between the 3. But speaking of design, it's technically the first Pokemon shown off in the Japanese anime, as in the Japanese opening, it's the first Pokemon to appear, which is probably a very intentional choice, as they knew that people would be drawn to the show just by looking at Charizard. On top of this, between the 3 starters they chose to give to Ash, the main protagonist of the show, they chose to give him a Charizard, when they very well could have given him any one of the 3 fully evolved starters. But for marketing, they probably chose what they thought would be the most popular starter to give to Ash, and Charizard it was. And while you could argue that making Ash have Charizard increased its own popularity because as kids, we had a lot of bias towards Ash's own Pokemon, Charizard was already setting records as the most popular card in Pokemon's first ever trading card game set. And the first edition Charizard of base set is still one of the most valuable and most sought after Pokemon cards to this day. Not only is it popular and expensive, but the artwork is incredibly cool and iconic. Since this time, Charizard has been everywhere across every medium. In every generation of Pokemon trading cards, you'll always find a Charizard card be one of, if not, the most expensive card of that era. And every time Pokemon needs TCG sales to gain a boost, a Charizard card or a Charizard set will be printed. This has been especially apparent with some of the most recent sets like Hidden Fates, Shining Fates, Champion's Path, and Obsidian Flames. But trust me when I say that it's been like this all the time. Crystal Charizard, Charizard Gold Star, there was even a Shiny Charizard card in the Team Plasma sets in Gen 5 when Charizard was rarely available. And speaking of being rarely available, in the games, the only generation where Charizard was really hard to come by was again in Generation 5, in Unova, largely because it was either only or mainly Unova Pokemon in those games, depending on which games you played. But you know what's funny? Charizard still managed to make it into these games, not as a Pokemon, but as a bridge, because the Driftveil Bridge, being so red, wasn't called the Great Darmanitan Bridge or something, but it was also referred to as the Charizard Bridge. The Charizard Bridge in a game where we thought Charizard wasn't going to appear at all, and Black and White still managed to include Charizard in there as a bridge. That's how important Charizard is to the franchise. But you know what else is just as far as Charizard? Holzkern, today's video sponsor, who I reached out to because I love their natural products. I'm a big fan of both watches and jewelry, and Holzkern creates them for both men and women. My favorite part about Holzkern, as I just mentioned, is that they use all natural material for all of their products. Like this is all natural, and so is this, the watch I was just wearing. Like, it's crazy. They do this to ensure that each product is unique and of high quality, and they only manufacture in small batches to ensure responsible and ethical production. On top of this, every product comes with a 2-year guarantee. They offer free express worldwide shipping from the beautiful Vienna, and the craziest thing, custom fees are taken care of by them. Do you know how crazy it is for a company to offer that they'll take care of custom fees for you? That's unheard of, man. It's simply unheard of. Products usually arrive within 2 to 5 business days, and I can attest for that because mine got here within 2 days. It was pretty crazy. And on top of all that, you can use my code HYBRIDHERO, I'm using this like it's a Mega Evolution bracelet, for 15% off the entire website. You can also check the link in the description down below or the comment section or the QR code right up here. Thank you to Holzkern for sponsoring this video. Now let's get back to some more Charizard. It appeared in almost every generation in a significant way. In Generation 2, it was in the opening of the games for Gold and Silver. In Generation 3, it was the mascot for Fire Red. In Generation 4, it was used in Red's battle. Generation 6, it got special treatment with 2 Mega Evolutions when it was completely unnecessary and was purely just fan service. And through there, it also gained the Dragon typing that it was always being laughed at for. In Generation 7, it was a Ride Pokemon. Not only was it a Ride Pokemon, but it was the only Ride Pokemon that wasn't a part of the Alola Dex. Every other Ride Pokemon was a part of the Dex, but Charizard got special treatment. Don't get me started on Generation 8, because this thing was front and center of attention then. At the time of Sword and Shield's release, this was the only Kanto starter and the only starter Pokemon, excluding Pikachu and Eevee, to get a G-Max form. Yeah, the other 2 Kanto starters and Galar starters did get G-Max forms, but that was only after when the DLC was announced. Till then, it looked like it was a Charizard solo show. But even if you don't count that, Charizard was the ace of Leon, Galar's undefeated champion, and because of that, it appeared throughout Sword and Shield, and served as the final fight to the main story. Literally, this thing was straight up right up in your face the whole time. Sure, in Generation 9, it hasn't been too crazy. I think it may have had a few distributions here and there, but that's probably because they're saving the Charizard Generation marketing for Legends CA since it's coming back with its Megas, of course. But even if you don't count that, Charizard has still been in the spotlight for Generation 9 through the anime, because it's on the posters of Horizons and is one of Freed's main Pokemon alongside Pikachu. Well, I don't know what's going to happen to him and Charizard now, considering that they're both absent from the poster on Horizon's time skip. But hey, Charizard was used to carry the anime once again. And I say once again because Ash's Charizard carried the Gen 2 anime and the 3rd anime movie. It carried the Gen 3 anime in the Battle Frontier arc with some of the hypest episodes. It didn't need to carry the Gen 4 anime, surprisingly, because it was that peak. But the Gen 5 anime was such a bust that they needed Charizard's return on Ash's team to get any mileage out of the show. In the X and Y anime, Alon's Charizard was one of the strongest Pokemon there, even besting Ash and Greninja for the top place in the Lumiose Cup. He always had a Charizard from episode 1 in the Gen 7 anime, and again in the Generation 8 anime, Leon was there with his Charizard and Ash's final battle. And no, I'm not counting Aim to be a Pokemon Master, so his final battle was a battle between him and Leon, with Pikachu and Charizard going head to head in what is probably the best battle in the Pokemon anime. It is insane. The manga was generous in the sense that no single Pokemon ever appears like that, and Red's Kanto starter was Venusaur. However, in the Fire Red and Leaf Green arc, he did trade his Venusaur for Green's Charizard, and honestly, I think that was again for the Charizard hype. I can go on and on about Charizard here. I haven't even made mention of how it appears on the cover of so many different spin-off games and other feats it's had in the TCG, but the point is, no matter the medium, no matter the era, no matter what it is, Charizard has been heavily pushed by Pokemon in all sorts of ways. It is without a doubt a huge selling point for the company and a huge part of the hype factor for this series. Yeah, a lot of old fans are sick and tired of the Charizard treatment, but the fact is, Charizard still gets views like a clickbaity YouTube video. But if you want more fun and potentially clickbaity Pokemon videos, then please subscribe to the channel, as 98% of my audience is still unsubscribed. Maybe me talking about Charizard will help the numbers. As long as Charizard will bring the attention, it will always have a place in Pokemon as one of the key mascots. But is it the mascot that sits right next to Pikachu? Maybe, but there is one other Pokemon who quite literally sat right next to Pikachu that might have a better shot. Enter Eevee, a Pokemon that alongside its evolutions probably has more merch than Pikachu at this point. Eevee is a very unique Pokemon. It's a part of the original 151 and has a similar nostalgia factor to the way Pikachu and the original Kanto starters do, as it was a starter in Pokemon Yellow. Except this time, it was a starter that the rival could pick. But nevertheless, people start to see Pikachu and Eevee as a duo from here on out, depending on the scenario. But even before that, Eevee was a gift Pokemon Red and Blue that anyone could obtain, and it was the first Pokemon to have a split evolution. The only Pokemon in Gen 1 to have a split evolution actually, evolving into either Vaporeon, Flareon, or Jolteon. Because of this alone, it was super unique. So when Eevee and its family debuted in the TCG in the jungle set, the evolutions were some of the most sought after cards, and in terms of commons, Pikachu and Eevee were the most expensive common cards. So even then, these two were sort of paired up. It wasn't just the TCG in the games, however, as in the manga, Red also had an Eevee, and it was a pretty significant part of his team and the story of the manga. Some even say that he had Eevee because it was the other mascot to the series. In the anime, while it did receive some featured episodes, it wasn't really that significant in the original series until Gary caught his own in the Orange Islands, and basically replicated the initial Pokemon Yellow rival fight with Pikachu vs Eevee. That's not to say that Eevee wasn't significant in the anime, because it very much was, as we will see later. But this is just to emphasize that Eevee's mascot viability only came into fruition after Pokemon Yellow came into light. Till then, it was a pretty significant Pokemon, but it wasn't in the running to be a mascot like how Charizard was, because if it was, we definitely would have seen it more heavily in the Indigo League, and we probably would have seen a debut in the base set in TCG. My suspicion is that after the initial 151 were released and shown off to the world, Eevee's popularity started to grow slowly at first in being a cute, yet also very cool and relatable Pokemon. It's probably the Pokemon that most people want to have as a pet in their homes, and so Game Freak and the Pokemon Company probably saw the love for the Pokemon and probably decided to pump its marketing. And so Eevee became a staple Pokemon in every generation moving forward. When Gen 2 arrived, not only did Eevee get 2 more evolutions, with Espeon being a staple on Red's team in both the manga and the games, and Umbreon being one of the single most popular Pokemon ever since debut, but there was a whole mandatory section of the game dedicated to trainers who used the evolutions, and only the evolutions as their partner Pokemon. Umbreon started to be Gary's equivalent of Ash's Pikachu in the anime, and the Kimono Girls from the games had multiple episodes in the anime now as well. In the TCG, Espeon and Umbreon also debuted in the Neo Discovery set, with their set basically revolving around those 2 cards. I mean, technically not, but technically yes, since they're like the most expensive cards there. And this also extends into Gen 3, as just like Charizard Goldstar Umbreon is one of the most expensive cards in the history of the TCG. All 5 of the evolutions in Gen 3 have Gold Stars that are highly sought after, but Goldstar, Umbreon, and Espeon are the top of the ranks. Espeon and Umbreon also became starters in Pokemon Coliseum, as they were cool Pokemon to have as starters, but it was mainly because Game Freak needed players to find a way to get Espeon and Umbreon feasibly in Gen 3. But that doesn't explain why Eevee was a starter Pokemon in XD Gale of Darkness. That one had to be because Eevee is just that Pokemon, and the versatility of being able to evolve into 5 different Pokemon is just that crazy. This is also the start of the Eevee companion trend in the anime, where we start to see a bunch of Ash's companions start to own Eevee in pretty much every generation moving forward from here. Because May randomly got an Eevee in the Battle Frontier arc, and in the Sinnoh series, we see a return with it evolved as a Glaceon. Dawn, while she doesn't get an Eevee, does have a rival Zoe with a Leafeon, and her mom with an Umbreon. We see another coordinated competitor of hers evolve her 2 Eevees into Flare and Vaporeon, so Eevee and its evolutions really start to appear everywhere here. And why wouldn't it? It got 2 new evolutions like we mentioned earlier, pretty much going 4 for 4 for being significant within generations. Majestic Dawn also being the main TCG set for the new Evos. In Gen 5, when it looked as though every old Pokemon was going to get sidelined, Eevee still managed to make a major appearance, as the guy who beat the entire Unova Elite Four in the anime was a frickin' Eevee user who only used Eevee in its evolutions. Which, I don't know if that's because it became accessible in Black 2 and White 2 and everyone used it on their team or what, but this guy Virgil was a monster and single-handedly made Eevee crazy relevant in Gen 5. And in Gen 6, there was no doubt Sylveon stole the show, being one of the mascots of the generations, you can say. Serena caught an Eevee that also evolved in Sylveon, and Sylveon became a very popular card in the TCG, second to Umbreon amongst the evolutions, which, by the way, if it wasn't clear already, Umbreon is up there on the same level of Charizard in terms of TCG popularity. So much so that when the Sun and Moon TCG set came out, the most expensive cards of the base set were once again versions of Umbreon and Espeon. But more than its evolutions, Eevee is the Pokemon that dominated the scene here, as not only did Eevee receive a unique Z-move in the form of Extreme Evo Boost, which you can say is like a parallel to Pikachu getting a Z-move, but just like Pikachu, Eevee finally became the sole mascot of its own game, Pokemon Let's Go Pikachu and Eevee, which is a remake of Pokemon Yellow. Eevee at this point in time is pretty much neck and neck seen right alongside Pikachu. It was deemed popular enough to be marketed alongside Pikachu, the only viable option amongst the original 151. Of course, this is also because it wouldn't make sense for it to be Pikachu and Charizard, but it's still a pretty big statement. Merch for Eevee exploded from here, not like it didn't already. We haven't been talking much about the merchandise side of things, but one of the things that makes the Eevee line so popular is the merchandise. Everyone wants at least something Eevee or evolution related, so in that sense, its popularity also rises. And again, with popularity rising like that, it's bound to make an appearance in the anime. And look at that! Lana had an Eevee in Sun and Moon, and immediately afterwards, Chloe gets an Eevee in Journeys. That's 3 back-to-back female companions for Ash with Eevees. Sword and Shield also gave Eevee a G-Max form to parallel Pikachu's. But what's interesting here is that Eevee, Pikachu, and Charizard all received G-Max forms in the same trailer, so take that how you will. Gen 8 is also where all the TCGs start to cater towards the evolutions a lot more, giving them their own TCG set in the form of Evolving Skies, which is one of, if not, the most popular set in the Gen 8 TCG scene, with the most expensive cards of that era coming from then. And now, in Generation 9, Pokemon decides to release Prismatic Evolutions, another evolution set that no one can grab their hands on right now, and wouldn't you know it, some of the most expensive prices on cards from this generation come from this set. From what I can tell with the anime and the games, there's been no particular favoritism for Eevee in Generation 9 yet, but since we are going back to Kalos, who knows, there might be with Sylveon. But yeah, I think Let's Go Eevee alone was enough to make Eevee a legitimate contender for the second mascot of the series. But I have to touch upon everything else first. I didn't even mention the one-shot anime special that Eevee got, or how it was the player starter in Pokemon Conquest, and other things like that. If you do go to an official Pokemon event, I guarantee you, more than the Charizard line or even Pikachu, you'll see more people rock out with the evolution merch, so there's a lot that Eevee has going for it. But if you ask me, it seems as though Eevee gets bursts of popularity in the Pokemon history. Like, yes, it's consistently popular, but the way it's officially pushed, it's calculated. Whereas it seems Charizard is always pushed for. So I still do think there's a legitimate debate to have between the two. But as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, there is still a third possible candidate to represent the lot, and I want to go over that Pokemon before the final debate. But before we go over the third Pokemon, let's go over some honorable mentions, because no, the third Pokemon is not Mewtwo. I know, it's crazy. Just like how crazy it is for you to have not hit the subscribe button yet. You really should if you want to see more random evergreen video topics like this one. Mewtwo, for as iconic as it is being the star of the first Pokemon movie, a reoccurring character all the way till Journeys, the strongest Pokemon from the early days, and even again back in Gen 6 with the receiving 2 Mega Evolutions, being a significant character in Smash, and even other games like Pokken, having its own super expensive cards and notable sets, still doesn't keep up with Charizard and Eevee. It has crazy notable feats, and I think it's on par with those two Pokemon in terms of the overall popularity, but maybe just a tad bit lesser, but the main thing is merch and marketing. Mewtwo isn't really marketable. Yeah, it's iconic and everyone knows it and likes it, but you're not gonna see too many fans wear merch of it or something, and mascots are always super marketable, and are money printers for merch and all, so it's just how it goes. Yeah, so while Mewtwo's high up there, it ain't making the cut. Meowth is another strong Gen 1 contender, as it's been nearly in all the episodes of the anime prior to Horizons, and it and Pikachu also have the cat and mouse dynamic, or Tom and Jerry mechanic going on, even with their Pokédex entries being number 52 and number 25 respectively, an intentional inverse to show this dynamic, so they do work well as a pair. When regional forms came out and Pikachu got an Alolan evolution, Meowth for some reason was given a whole new form and an evolution. And in Generation 8, it got another regional form, as well as this time a whole new evolution to it. So there was some kind of push for this Pokemon. Not to mention, it also got a Gigantamax form. This cat was also pretty marketable for merch and all, but unfortunately from what I can tell, after Team Rocket left the scene, so did Meowth, as there hasn't been much of a push for it since. And it kinda makes sense. Meowth is heavily associated to Team Rocket, and once they were gone, well, there is no need to keep Meowth there unless it really was a secondary mascot. And it not being there, I think confirms that it doesn't have what it takes to be the secondary mascot. Jigglypuff was climbing up there with potential mascot status early on, another playable character in Smash Bros for the meme material, as it was super memey in the anime, but over the years, that gag has since died down, and so has its mascot status. Poliwhirl, Rhydon, and Clefairy are all interesting, as these are all mascot Pokemon in their own right. There was a heavy push for Poliwhirl in Gen 1 and Gen 2, with Poliwhirl being Red's first Pokemon in the manga. Red and Gold both owning a member of the Poliwag family in the manga, Satoshi Tajiri's favorite Pokemon being Poliwag, the Burger King Poliwhirl promo thing, okay, I guess that one doesn't count, but I mean, I think it says that there was a push for it somehow, you know what I mean? Rhydon was the first Pokemon created, of course, so that was getting pushed, and there are Rhydon statues everywhere in the game. Clefairy is a big one, as it's meant to be the original mascot, but got switched to Pikachu for being more gender neutral. But still, Clefairy was very prominent across all the media with Mount Moon the games, anime, and manga, and it did kinda have its own manga anyways, but Yeah, all of these guys had their popularity come down after Gen 1 or 2, so it's not them. But there are some newer Gen Pokemon who have had crazy levels of popularity, like another starter Pokemon, Greninja. Greninja was X and Y's baby, and the first time a water starter got special treatment. In fact, it got so much special treatment that it got its very own new form in the anime, which later appeared in the Sun and Moon demo, and was able to be used as a special exclusive, incredibly busted Pokemon in the Alola games. Greninja is without a doubt one of the most popular starters, and its presence in Gen 6 and 7 was incredible. Even Gen 8, while it wasn't really in the games or anything, it was still relevant as everyone wanted to see Ash's Greninja return in the anime, and when it did, it was supposedly one of the most hype episodes of this season. I think there are better episodes, but hey, that's just me. Either way, Greninja couldn't have a place in the games really because it was unobtainable in every Generation 8 game, but it did reappear in the Generation 9 games, not just in the DLC or anything, because Greninja was right there in Nemona's house as a painting in the beginning of the game. So again, there is this push for the Pokemon. Merch-wise, it also does pretty well if I'm not mistaken, and in my eyes, it's the new Gen Charizard. It even got to be a playable character in Smash Bros. Like Mewtwo and Charizard did, but just like how Greninja is a ninja Pokemon, it remains concealed until it wants to reveal itself. When Game Freak and the Pokemon Company want to reveal Greninja and get the hype going, they do, but otherwise, they hold back on it. It's like a secret weapon, so in that sense, I still don't see it like a mascot. But there are these cool Pokemon of every generation that really have this mascot-like status, you know? Specific to that generation. Like Greninja in Gen 6, Lycanroc for Generation 7, Zoroark for Gen 5, they're all pretty cool Pokemon that steal the show somehow. But, you know, there is one other Pokemon who also fits this build, who I legitimately think is the low-key new mascot of the series. And that Pokemon is none other than Lucario. Where to even begin with Lucario? To explain to everyone how crazy the push for this Pokemon is, let's start with the fact that I have the same amount of things to say about Lucario as I would Charizard and Eevee. But the thing is, this Pokemon came out in Generation 4, a whole 3 generations after Pikachu and the other 2. But though Lucario came out in Gen 4, its hype began in Gen 3 itself, as Lucario had a whole movie dedicated to it for some reason, and immediately became a fan favorite as well as a poster child for Generation 4 as a whole. So much so that Lucario was added to Smash Bros. Brawl as a new fighter, almost replacing Mewtwo. It had that level of popularity upon its release. The Diamond Pearl anime even had another similar Riolu have a cool saga with Ash, and had Maylene and Riley have Lucario as their aces. Speaking of Riley, in the games, this guy just straight up gives you a Riolu, and Cynthia uses Lucario in her team. So this Pokemon was in all the highlighted spots across the games and the anime. It was very much there in the TCG as well, but I don't think Lucario cards go too crazy in terms of collectability, the same way that most Pikachu cards wouldn't. You'd think that in Gen 5, Lucario's popularity would come to a halt in the anime and the games, but no, you'd be wrong. Riolu is one of the earliest possible catches in Black 2 and White 2, so much so that almost everyone wanted to use one. They just give you one of Sinnoh's strongest Pokemon just like that. Lucario had so much of the spotlight that in Black 2 and White 2's animated trailer, Lucario had the best and biggest spotlight out of any of Nate's Pokemon shown, which is crazy. And speaking of the anime, frickin' Cameron. This guy was the one to beat Ash, and do you know which Pokemon was his ace who did most of the work for him? His partner Riolu, who evolved into Lucario mid-battle. This could have been any other Pokemon, but no, it had to be Lucario. And funny enough, between Virgil, Cameron, and Ash, they each owned the 3 Pokemon we're debating as mascots and used it in this part of the series. Eevee, Lucario, and Charizard respectively. Kinda crazy, but yeah, again, it's crazier that Lucario managed to be here. But even crazier than this is the amount of lore and significance surrounding Lucario in X and Y. In Kalos, a region that should technically have nothing to do with it, probably has more for it than Sinnoh has. Lucario gained a Mega Evolution in X and Y, and it was advertised as one of the first Mega Evolutions shown to the world alongside Mewtwo and Blaziken. And that's quite poetic because within X and Y, Lucario was literally thought to be the first ever Mega Pokemon. So it had crazy lore surrounding it, such crazy lore that the Tower of Mastery is all about Lucario, and there's a Tower of Lucario that literally makes it seem like a god. And even crazier, Karina has Lucario, which is a significant part of the games. She gives you one of her 2 Lucarios, and then that Lucario is the first Pokemon that you Mega Evolve in the game, and you just get to keep it and move on. It's insane. They just hand you a Mega Lucario after the 3rd gen. Karina's Mega Lucario was also again another significant part to the anime, but you just wait on that one. Gen 7 did slow down the Lucario hype train a bit, but I would still argue that it was relevant. It was literally the poster child of Pokken after all, and was on the front cover of that game alongside Pikachu. Don't think the Lucario was excused from the anime either. Yeah, it didn't appear much, but when it did appear, it appeared on Kukui's team in the final battle against Ash, like it was some kind of PTSD. But it's okay because this time he won. But yeah, he was considered champion level in this series again. And then comes Generation 8, which, oh boy. Lucario was in every single game in Generation 8, and BDSP being remixed of Diamond and Pearl, it had everything it had back then, plus while it wasn't crazy significant, it was on Volo's team in Legends Arceus, which, hey, is still the best fight in the series in my opinion. But the real craziness comes from the anime. My god, they actually went ahead and gave Ash a Riolu that ended up having some crazy whole arc, becoming a Lucario, turning into the new ace of his team, getting a Mega Evolution, training with Greninja, probably his most strongest Pokemon ever, and even beating Cynthia and all kinds of other feats. They knew they needed to give Ash a banger for his ace for his departure, and between all the Pokemon left remaining that they could have used, they just knew that it 100% had to be Lucario. And they were right, because people were mad hype about this. And when Ash did get Lucario, the majority of his team got pushed to the side just for Lucario to shine. That's how significant they deemed it to be. But that is the end of Ash's journey, and it's a good thing that we won't be seeing Lucario anytime soon. Oh my freaking god, you gotta be freaking kidding me! Mega Lucario? A shiny Mega Lucario? Pokemon finally does a time skip in the anime, and the first thing we see is Roy pull out a shiny Mega Lucario? What kind of fan service is this? As if he wasn't Ash enough already, he's even got Captain Pikachu with him, and they gave him a shiny Lucario to match his yellow and red aesthetic? This is insane. Look, I know Pikachu and Charizard have had the limelight in the Gen 9 anime, but this is too much. I can't believe this one. Lucario is pretty much replacing Charizard here, since it's not in the anime at this point, so at the very least, Pokemon thinks that Lucario is strong enough as a mascot to take on Charizard's shoes. This reveal is half the reason as to why I was inspired to make this video. It's that insane. Even when they announced that the Megas are coming back to the TCG, they just had to show Mega Lucario so that people could get it. Lucario, unlike Pokemon like Mewtwo, does have a lot of merch and marketing around it. You will usually see some Lucario cosplay or merch at a Pokemon convention, dare I say more than Charizard. Maybe, but less than the evolution, so it's super high up there for being a mascot. But since we've mentioned all three of our primary candidates, why don't we go ahead and compare the three? All three of them come with their pros and cons, and all three of them have been mascots in their own way. But if I had to say which of the three of them would be considered to be the secondary mascot, I would probably have to say, and take your guesses in the comment section if you haven't already, it's still Charizard. But Lucario is the close second. I don't think Charizard's iconic factor is going to die down anytime soon. It was pushed for marketing back in the beginning of Gen 1, and now to market Legends ZA, it's still at the front of marketing. I just think it's got everything. The design, the nostalgia, the power, the feel, it's hard to beat. And yeah, while it lacks merch like the other two, it makes up for it in sheer iconicness. Heck, Ash's Pikachu versus Leon's Charizard could be seen as a head-to-head finale of the battle between the two mascots of the series. Lucario, however, is a Pokemon who I think they're building up to be another mascot of the series, or potentially even the new secondary mascot as seen when Freeze Charizard just got replaced with Roy's Lucario. I suspect that they see more merch sales with Lucario, and in general, Lucario is probably a Pokemon that caters towards both a new audience and a bit of an older audience or a middle-of-the-road audience. It's like they're intentionally trying to build Lucario up to be the new Charizard, so they insert it to be one of these Pokemon that's front and center wherever possible. Now, many of you are probably asking, what about Eevee? It literally had a game with Pikachu as a mascot and all. And yes, while that is true, I think Pikachu serves the cute mascot that's the face of the franchise, and Eevee just adds to that. Yes, its merch sales are probably the craziest among all the Pokemon families out there, but that doesn't really bring in anything new that Pikachu doesn't already bring from a marketing perspective. I think the only reason why it's here is really because it's obviously a fan favorite Pokemon, but also because no other Pokemon can be besides Pikachu in terms of being equals. If Lucario or Charizard are there, best believe the preference will tilt towards the fully evolved Pokemon, so it's kind of there by default. This isn't to say anything bad about Eevee or anything, that it isn't good or anything like that. It very much is, and definitely is a mascot in its own way. But if Pokemon had to choose 2 Pokemon to represent the franchise, I think we're getting Pikachu and Charizard, with Lucario and Eevee coming at 3rd and 4th place respectively. What do you guys think? One thing's for sure though, we can debate all we want about the second mascot of the franchise, but there's not a single Pokemon that can be debated against Pikachu, because Pikachu is just that irreplaceable as the franchise of the mascot, and no Pokemon will ever take its place as the true mascot of the series.